On the alien world of Xylath, there lived a small alien girl named Lyra. She was different from the others, not just in the way she looked, but in the way she moved, spoke, and even the way she felt. Lyra was small, much smaller than the rest of her kind, and that made her an easy target for the others' laughter and cruelty. Her people, the Xylathians, were tall, strong, and proud. They were known for their remarkable speed and their ability to control the elements with a mere thought. But Lyra had none of these abilities. She was a mini-alien girl, as they liked to call her. Her small frame and delicate features made her seem fragile to the others, and that made her an outcast. Every day Lyra would wake up in her small home at the edge of the village. The sun on Xylath rose in hues of purple and gold, casting a gentle glow over the landscape. But despite the beauty of her world, Lyra always felt alone. She would step outside, hoping to join the others, hoping to be accepted. But she was always met with cold stares or whispered insults. "Look at her, so small," one of the Xylathians would say. "Is she even one of us? Maybe she's just a mistake of nature," another would whisper, chuckling at her expense. Lyra's heart would ache every time. She had tried so many times to be like them, to blend in, but no matter how hard she tried, the others never accepted her. She had been taught that all Xylathians should be proud of their strength, but her strength was different. She wasn't strong in the same way as the others. She was gentle, compassionate, and more thoughtful than most. But on Xylath, these qualities were seen as weaknesses. One day, Lyra wandered through the village, hoping to escape the whispers and stares. She walked along the wide paths that stretched between the tall silver buildings, their smooth surfaces reflecting the bright sun. The village was bustling with activity, but Lyra felt invisible, like a shadow drifting in the background. The other Xylathians were busy with their tasks. Some were practicing their elemental skills. Others were discussing important matters of state. But no one noticed her. Lyra found herself at the edge of the village, near a large cliff that overlooked a wide river. She had always come here when she felt the weight of loneliness pressing on her chest. The view was beautiful, with the river winding through the valley below, but today it felt empty. The wind whispered through the trees, but it felt like the wind was mocking her. Her eyes filled with tears as she sat down on a rock, wrapping her arms around her knees. "What's wrong with me?" she whispered to herself. "Why can't they accept me?" The silence of the cliff seemed to answer her question, and for a long moment she sat there lost in her thoughts. Lyra had never known why she was so different from the others, but she knew that it made her an outcast. She had tried to speak to the elders, to ask them why she was so small, but they only told her that it was a flaw, something she would have to live with. "Be proud of who you are," they would say, "even if you are not like the others." But pride wasn't enough when everyone else rejected you. As the sun began to set, casting a soft orange glow over the landscape, Lyra stood up. She wiped her eyes and began walking back to her home, knowing the others would be gathered in the village square, enjoying the evening and laughing with each other. She didn't want to face them today, but she had no choice. When she reached the square, she found a group of Xylathians standing together, laughing and talking. They turned and saw her approach, and for a brief moment, the laughter faded, replaced by uncomfortable silence. Then one of them, a tall Xylathian with striking red hair, spoke up. "Why are you always alone, Lyra?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Don't you have any friends?" Lyra's heart sank. She didn't know how to answer. She wanted to say something clever, something that would make them stop laughing at her, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just nodded weakly and tried to walk past them, but the group stepped aside, blocking her path. "You know," the same Xylathian continued, "maybe you're just too small to be around us. You'll never be like the rest of us." Lyra wanted to argue, to defend herself, but she couldn't. The words cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She turned away quickly, not wanting to let them see the tears that were beginning to fall. She ran through the streets, ignoring the stares of the others, until she found herself at the edge of the village again. Lyra collapsed onto the ground, her body trembling with emotion. She had tried to fit in, tried to prove herself, but it felt like no matter how hard she tried, she would always be different. She was never going to be like the other Zalathians. She was always going to be the mini alien girl. As the night grew darker, Lyra sat alone, her heart heavy with sadness. She didn't know what the future held for her, but she knew one thing for certain. She was different. And that difference had led her to a life of isolation. But what she didn't know was that change was coming, and it was going to come from a place she never expected. The days that followed Lyra's painful encounter in the village were some of the hardest she had ever faced. Her heart felt as if it was weighed down by an unshakable sadness. She spent most of her time in the small, quiet corner of her home, staring out at the vast landscape that stretched beyond the village. The purple skies of Zelath, once so beautiful to her, now seemed like a distant reminder of a life she would never be a part of. One morning, as Lyra sat at the edge of a rocky cliff near her home, she noticed something different in the sky. The usual glow of the sun had not yet reached its peak, but the distant horizon shimmered with an unusual light. A loud hum filled the air, and the ground beneath her feet trembled. At first, she thought it was an earthquake, but the vibrations didn't feel like anything natural. Lyra's curiosity got the better of her, and she stood up, walking toward the source of the sound. As she climbed the narrow path along the cliffside, her heart began to race. The humming grew louder, and the air around her felt strangely heavy. Soon, she saw it, a large metallic craft descending from the sky, glowing with a soft blue light. The craft landed smoothly in a nearby clearing, its sleek surface reflecting the morning light. Lyra's eyes widened with wonder and fear. She had heard stories of visitors from other worlds, humans they were called, but she had never imagined they would come to her planet. She stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. The hatch of the ship slowly opened, and a figure stepped out. At first, Lyra could only see a tall silhouette against the bright light of the ship, but as the figure moved forward, she saw him more clearly. He was a human with dark hair and warm brown eyes that seemed to glimmer with kindness. His face was gentle, and he wore a simple uniform, though there was an aura of calm confidence about him. "Hello?" the human called out, his voice smooth and welcoming. Lyra felt a mix of fear and curiosity. She had never seen a human up close before, but there was something about his presence that was different from the coldness she had experienced with her own kind. She stepped back instinctively, unsure of whether she should approach or run. The human noticed her hesitation and stopped, standing still for a moment. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said gently, his eyes meeting hers with a reassuring warmth. Lyra stayed where she was, unsure of what to make of him. She had always been taught that humans were strange and sometimes dangerous, but there was something in his voice, something kind, that made her feel less afraid. She hesitated, but took a small step forward, watching him carefully. I'm Lyra," she said softly, her voice shaky from both the encounter and the weight of her emotions. The human smiled, his expression friendly and understanding. "I'm Dr. Andrew Hall," he said, his tone warm and non-threatening. "I'm part of a team sent to study Xylath. We've been exploring for some time now, and it seems we've made an unexpected stop." Lyra blinked in confusion. You're here to study us?" "Yes," Andrew nodded. "But we're also here to learn about your world. We've heard so much about your people and their abilities." Lyra felt a rush of emotions, excitement, confusion, but most of all, curiosity. She had always felt like an outsider on Xyloth, and the idea that someone, especially a human, wanted to learn about her world made her feel, for the first time, that maybe she wasn't so invisible after all. Andrew took a step closer, but he moved slowly, careful not to frighten her. "I've read about Xyloth and your people. You're incredible, Lyra." Lyra looked at him, startled by his words. She had never heard anyone speak of her world with such admiration. To the Xylothians, she was too small, too weak to be considered special. But here, in the presence of this human, she felt for the first time that maybe she had something of value to offer. I'm not like the others, Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not strong. I'm not powerful, I'm just small. Andrew's gaze softened, and he stepped even closer. You don't need to be like the others, Lyra. What makes you different is what makes you special. Lyra looked down at her feet, feeling both grateful and uncertain. She had never known what it felt like to be told that she was special, especially by someone who didn't care about her size or strength. I don't know what to do, Lyra admitted, her voice trembling. The others, they laugh at me. They call me a mistake. I don't belong here. Andrew's expression turned serious and he took another step closer. That's not true, he said firmly. You belong just as much as anyone else. Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are. For the first time in a long while, Lyra felt her heart lighten. The warmth in Andrew's eyes and the kindness in his voice touched her deeply. He didn't know her, yet he treated her like she mattered. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with both hope and sadness. I don't know how to fit in, she whispered. I don't know if I ever will. Andrew took a deep breath, considering his words carefully. Maybe you don't need to fit in. Maybe you just need to find someone who sees you for who you really are. Lyra felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. It was as if in that moment, she wasn't just a mini alien girl. She was someone who mattered. She didn't know what to say, but for the first time she didn't feel so alone. I'm sorry, Lyra said suddenly as if realizing something. I didn't mean to upset you by being so different. Andrew shook his head with a smile. You didn't upset me at all, Lyra. I'm just glad to meet you. The two stood in silence for a while, the gentle breeze of Xylath rustling through, the trees around them. Lyra felt a strange peace settle over her. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel rejected. She felt seen. And maybe, just maybe, there was more to her than the others had ever realized. As Andrew turned to leave, he glanced back at Lyra. I'll be here for a while. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm not going anywhere. Lyra smiled softly, feeling a flicker of hope inside her. Maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. The days that followed Lyra's meeting with Dr. Andrew Hall were different. She found herself returning to the same cliffside where they had first met, her mind racing with thoughts of the kind human who had spoken to her with such kindness. She couldn't quite explain it, but something about him felt comforting, like the warmth of the sun after a long, cold night. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of hope. It wasn't long before Andrew came back. His visits became regular, and Lyra, who had once feared the quiet, found herself looking forward to their conversations. He always seemed so calm and kind, as if his presence alone made the world seem a little less harsh. One morning, as Lyra was walking near the village's edge, she spotted him from a distance, his human figure standing against the bright purple sky. She felt her heart race, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from something different, a feeling she didn't quite understand but welcomed with open arms. Lyra, Andrew called out when he saw her. How are you today? Lyra smiled softly and waved back. I'm good, she replied. Better than before. Andrew walked toward her, carrying a small pouch. I thought you might like this, he said, offering it to her. What is it? Lyra asked, curious. It's food, Andrew explained. Back on Earth, we call it fruit. It's sweet and healthy. I thought you might enjoy it. Lyra looked at the pouch with fascination. She had never tasted food like what Andrew was offering. In her own world, food was practical but plain, nothing special. The Xylathians didn't care much for the joy of eating. But this was different. She accepted the pouch and smiled up at him. Thank you, she said, her voice soft but sincere. Andrew nodded and sat down beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They simply sat there watching the colors of the sky shift as the sun climbed higher. Lyra slowly opened the pouch and pulled out a piece of the fruit. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what it would taste like, but then took a bite. It was sweet. Sweet in a way that made her heart feel light. The flavors were unlike anything she had ever experienced before. She looked at Andrew, surprised by how good it tasted. "This is amazing," Lyra said, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's so different from anything I've ever eaten." Andrew laughed softly. "I'm glad you like it. Earth's food can be a bit strange for some, but it's one of my favorite things to share with others." Lyra smiled and took another bite. She felt a small warmth inside, something that had been missing for a long time. In that moment, sitting next to Andrew, she didn't feel so alone. For once, she felt like she belonged somewhere, even if it was just in that moment. They spent the rest of the day talking. Andrew told her about Earth, about the places he had visited and the people he had met. He spoke with such excitement, as though every detail of his world was something worth sharing. Lyra listened intently, fascinated by the stories of a place she had never seen. But it wasn't just the stories that drew her in. It was the way he spoke to her, like she mattered, like she was important. "I've never been told stories like this before," Lyra admitted quietly after a while. "The Zilathians never talk about things like this. They're focused on their strength, their abilities." Andrew nodded, understanding. "It sounds like they don't see the value in the things that really make life worth living. Stories, emotions, connections, those are the things that make us who we are, not just our abilities." Lyra's heart swelled with emotion. She'd always felt like she was missing something she couldn't quite explain. But now, sitting with Andrew, she realized what it was. It was the simple things, the conversations, the kindness, the feeling of being understood. These were the things that made her feel whole. "Do you think I'll ever be able to fit in with the others?" Lyra asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Andrew looked at her with a soft smile. "I don't think fitting in is the answer. You don't have to be like them, Lyra. You're already special. You just need to find the people who see that." Lyra looked down at the ground, pondering his words. It was hard for her to imagine a world where she was accepted for who she was. She had been rejected for so long that it felt impossible to believe it could change. "I don't know," she murmured. "I don't know if anyone could ever see me the way you do." Andrew's gaze softened and he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I see you for who you are, Lyra, and I think there are others out there who would too. You just have to believe in yourself, even if it's hard sometimes." The weight of his words hung in the air, but for the first time, Lyra didn't feel like they were empty promises. She felt a small spark of hope igniting in her chest. Maybe Andrew was right. Maybe she didn't need to fit in with the Zilathians. Maybe there was a place for her somewhere, and maybe she didn't have to keep pretending to be something she wasn't. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange light over the landscape, Lyra stood up. "I have to go," she said, though part of her didn't want to leave. "But I'll be back tomorrow, I promise." Andrew stood with her, a smile on his face. "I'll be here, every day if you need me." Lyra smiled back, her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of the future. She wasn't afraid of being alone. She had someone who cared, someone who saw her for who she truly was. And that, she realized, was all she needed to start believing in herself again. Lyra's days with Andrew had brought her a sense of peace she had never known before. The human's kindness and patience had allowed her to heal, to believe that maybe she wasn't a mistake, as the others on Xyloth had always told her. She felt a bond with him, a connection she hadn't thought was possible after years of isolation. It was a slow, quiet friendship that was growing into something more, a feeling Lyra was still learning to understand. But peace, it seemed, was always short-lived on Xyloth. One afternoon, while Lyra was gathering flowers by the edge of the village, a group of Xylathians arrived. They weren't like the others. This group wore the dark robes of the ruling council, their faces stern and unreadable. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine as they approached. She knew who they were. The council members had always been the ones to make the final decisions for the people, and they were the ones who had turned their backs on her. Lyra, one of the council members called, his voice cold and distant. Lyra looked up, her heart sinking. Yes? We need to speak with you, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, she followed them into the village square. Andrew had been off on another part of the planet with his team, and Lyra felt vulnerable without him by her side. As they walked, she could feel the weight of their gazes, those cold, judging stares that had followed her for as long as she could remember. But there was something different today, something that made her nervous. Once they reached the center of the village, the council members turned to her. One of them, a tall Zalathian with silver hair, stepped forward. We've discussed your behavior, Lyra, he said, his eyes hard. It's becoming clear that your interactions with the human are unacceptable. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling. The council member gave her a stern look. You've been spending too much time with them. The human. This isn't our way. You are one of us, and you must act like it. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She had known that the council didn't approve of her interactions with Andrew, but hearing it out loud made it feel all the more real. I don't understand, she whispered. He's kind to me. He's the first one who hasn't rejected me. One of the other council members, a woman with piercing green eyes, scoffed. Kindness has no place here. Your people, your race, are strong. We do not need to rely on weak human emotions. They only make you weak. Lyra felt a sharp pain in her chest. She had never seen the council this way, so harsh, so unyielding. I am not weak, she said, trying to steady her voice. I just want to be accepted. The council members exchanged looks, and the silver-haired man nodded. That's the problem, he said. You are not like us. You never will be. And now, you've allowed yourself to grow too close to someone who is beneath us. Lyra's throat tightened. He's not beneath anyone, she said, her voice breaking. Andrew is a good person. He's the only one who has ever treated me with respect. The council remained silent for a long moment, their eyes cold and judgmental. Finally, the silver-haired man spoke again. You must leave him, Lyra. You must stop seeing the human. If you refuse, you will be cast out. You will no longer have a place among us. Lyra felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under her. The weight of their words settled heavily on her shoulders, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. She looked around, hoping that somehow this was all a mistake, that this was some sort of twisted joke. But the coldness in their eyes told her otherwise. They meant it. I can't, she whispered, shaking her head. I can't just leave him. He's my friend. Enough, the councilwoman snapped. You are no longer welcome here if you continue this foolishness. Your actions are a disgrace to the Zalathian people. Lyra's heart shattered. She had spent her whole life trying to fit in, trying to belong, but now they were telling her that even the smallest connection, something as pure as friendship, was forbidden. She felt as though the world she had fought so hard to be a part of was slipping away from her, and she was powerless to stop it. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she forced herself to keep them at bay. I won't leave Andrew, she said quietly, her voice filled with quiet determination. I will not turn my back on him. The council members exchanged a look, then turned away from her. So be it, the silver-haired man said coldly. You are no longer one of us. With that, they walked away, leaving Lyra standing in the square, her world falling apart around her. She felt as though she had been torn in two, torn between the world she had always known and the one she had found with Andrew. She didn't belong in either place anymore, but there was no time to dwell on that. She had a choice to make, and she knew what she had to do. Lyra turned and rushed toward the edge of the village, heading straight for the cliff where she knew Andrew would be. She had to see him. She had to tell him what had happened. He had to know that she wasn't going to let the Zalathians drive her away. She reached the edge of the village and looked out at the distant horizon. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and red. Lyra's heart raced as she searched the land below for any sign of Andrew's ship. She needed him, needed his presence more than ever. Finally, she saw it. A small figure standing by the river, watching the sunset. It was him. Without another thought, Lyra ran toward him, her heart pounding with every step. As she neared him, she called out, her voice desperate. "Andrew! Andrew, please!" Andrew turned at the sound of her voice, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw the tears in her eyes. He stepped toward her, concern flooding his expression. "Lyra, what's wrong?" he asked gently, reaching out to take her hands. They told me I can't see you anymore," Lyra said, her voice shaking. "They said I have to choose. Them or you." Andrew's eyes softened, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "You don't have to choose, Lyra. Not anymore." Lyra closed her eyes, letting herself be enveloped by his warmth. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew that with Andrew by her side, she would face it. The days after the council's rejection were long and heavy. Lyra had never imagined her world would feel so small, so empty. The place she had once called home no longer seemed like a place of belonging. The Zalathians, once her people, had cast her aside, and now, even the village felt cold and unwelcoming. She had been given a choice, one she hadn't fully understood at first. But now, standing in Andrew's arms, Lyra understood it clearly. She had chosen the human, the one person who had treated her with kindness, who had seen her for who she truly was. And despite the council's harsh words, despite the loneliness that threatened to overwhelm her, Lyra knew that her decision was right. She wasn't going to let go of this connection. Not now, not ever. "Come with me," Andrew had said, his voice steady but filled with something more, something deeper. "You don't have to stay here. There's a place for you with me, a place where you'll never feel out of place." The thought of leaving Xyloth was terrifying, but the more Lyra thought about it, the more she realized that it wasn't just about escaping rejection. It was about starting fresh, starting somewhere new where she could find a family not bound by blood but by the things that truly mattered: kindness, trust, and love. She looked up at Andrew, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but also hope. "I've never left here before. I don't know what Earth will be like. I don't know if I'll ever truly fit in." Andrew smiled, brushing a stray strand of her hair behind her ear. "You'll fit in with me. That's all that matters right now, and together we'll figure the rest out." Lyra took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle in her chest. She had spent so many years in a world where she didn't belong, where she was told she wasn't enough. And now, for the first time in her life, someone believed in her. Not because of her size or her strength, but because of who she was as a person. "I'll go with you," she whispered, her voice quiet but resolute. "I don't know what awaits, but I know I don't want to be here anymore." Andrew's expression softened, and without saying a word, he took her hand in his, leading her toward the ship. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time Lyra wasn't afraid. She was ready to face the unknown, ready to leave behind the world that had never accepted her, and step into a new one where she could truly be herself. The ship, sleek and quiet, hummed softly as they boarded. Lyra sat by the window, gazing out at the vast expanse of space as the planet of Xyloth grew smaller in the distance. Her heart felt heavy, but there was also a sense of freedom that filled her chest. She was leaving behind a place that had never truly understood her, and as the stars stretched out before her, she realized that she was stepping into a future full of endless possibilities. Andrew sat beside her, his hand gently resting on hers. "You're not alone anymore, Lyra," he said softly. "We're in this together." She looked at him, feeling a warmth spread through her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." As the ship soared through the stars, Lyra closed her eyes, her mind racing with thoughts of the future. She didn't know what Earth would be like, or what challenges awaited her there. But one thing was certain. For the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. And that, more than anything, made the journey worth it. The journey to Earth was long, but the days passed quickly for Lyra. Each time she woke, she found herself growing more and more excited. She didn't know what to expect when they arrived, but she was no longer filled with fear. The world of Zilath felt so distant now, like a memory fading into the past. The future, with Andrew by her side, felt bright and full of hope. Finally, the ship began its descent into Earth's atmosphere. Lyra's heart raced with anticipation as the ground below came into view. She had heard stories of Earth, the cities, the landscapes, the people, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of it. The sky was blue, the sun warm, and the world below so different from the cold, distant planet she had left behind. As the ship touched down, Lyra's breath caught in her throat. They had landed in a wide open field, surrounded by trees and tall grass. In the distance, she could see buildings and roads, but for now, all she could focus on was the feeling of the earth beneath her feet. "Welcome to Earth, Lyra," Andrew said with a smile. "This is where we begin." Lyra stepped out of the ship, her eyes wide as she took in the beauty of the world around her. It was nothing like Zilath, but in that moment, it didn't matter. She was no longer the mini-alien girl who had been cast aside by her own kind. She was someone new, someone with a future full of potential and love. Andrew stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice soft but full of promise. Lyra smiled, her heart filled with warmth. "I am," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." Together they walked forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. But with Andrew by her side, Lyra knew that she would never have to face them alone. The days following Lyra's arrival on Earth felt like a dream. The world she had once feared, a world so different from Zilath, now felt like a place of endless possibilities. Everything was new to her, the sounds, the sights, and even the air felt different. But what made all the difference was Andrew, the human who had become her friend, her guide, and as she realized more and more each day, someone she cared for deeply. Lyra spent her days exploring the peaceful countryside with Andrew, learning about Earth's landscapes and the strange beauty of its green forests, wide open fields, and towering mountains. They visited small towns, walked along bustling streets, and even spent evenings under the stars sitting by quiet lakes. Each moment spent with Andrew made her feel more at home. She was no longer the mini-alien girl from Zilath. She was Lyra, someone who had finally found a place where she could belong. But there were still moments when she felt the weight of her past, when the memories of Zilath and the rejection from her own people would rise up and threaten to pull her back into the shadows of self-doubt. Those were the times when Andrew's words echoed in her mind. "You're not alone anymore. We're in this together." One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Lyra and Andrew stood at the edge of a quiet lake. The air was cool and the water reflected the last light of the day. They had been walking for hours, and now, as they looked out at the horizon, the world around them felt peaceful. "I never thought I'd find a place like this," Lyra said, softly, her voice carrying a hint of wonder. She had always believed that she would be forever out of place, forever searching for something she couldn't quite name. But now, standing beside Andrew, she realized that the place she had been searching for wasn't a physical location. It was the feeling of being understood, of being accepted, of being loved. Andrew turned to her, a soft smile on his face. "I think this is where you were always meant to be," he said, his voice gentle. "Not because of where you came from or where you thought you belonged, but because of who you are." Lyra looked up at him, her heart full. The connection between them had deepened over the weeks, and it wasn't just friendship anymore. She had always feared getting close to others, worried that they would one day turn away from her as everyone else had. But Andrew was different. He saw her, not as a mistake or an outcast, but as someone worth caring for. And for the first time in her life, Lyra felt truly seen. "I'm glad I found you, Andrew," she said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. Andrew reached for her hand, his fingers gently intertwining with hers. "And I'm glad you found me," he replied. "You've changed my life, Lyra. I didn't know what I was missing until you came into my world." Lyra felt a warmth spread through her chest, and for a moment, all the uncertainty and fear she had carried for so long seemed to disappear. She was no longer afraid of her past, nor was she afraid of what the future might hold. In this moment, with Andrew by her side, she felt like she could face anything. As the night settled in, the stars above them began to twinkle, each one a tiny spark of light in the vast sky. Lyra leaned her head against Andrew's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. The warmth of his presence surrounded her, and she closed her eyes, content. "I don't ever want to lose this," she whispered. Andrew squeezed her hand gently. "You won't. I'm not going anywhere. We'll face whatever comes, together." Lyra smiled, the sound of his words a comfort she had never known before. For so long, she had been searching for a place to belong, a place where she could finally be herself without fear, and now she had found it, here, with Andrew, on Earth. The future was still uncertain, but in this moment, she knew that nothing could tear them apart. As they stood there, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, Lyra felt a sense of peace that she had never thought possible. She had once believed that her past defined her, that the rejection and isolation she had faced on Zelath would be the story of her life. But now, standing beside Andrew, she understood that her story was just beginning. She had the power to shape it, to write her own future. She looked up at him, her eyes soft with gratitude. "Thank you for showing me that there's more to life than what I thought." Andrew smiled down at her, his eyes full of affection. "Thank you for letting me in." And in that moment, Lyra knew that she had found her home. It wasn't a place or a planet. It was a person. It was the way she felt when she was with Andrew, when she was allowed to be herself without fear. It was the love that had started as something small, something quiet, and had blossomed into something strong and unbreakable. Lyra closed her eyes, feeling the gentle breeze of earth on her skin, and for the first time in her life, she felt whole. The past was behind her, and the future, with all its uncertainties, was something she would face with Andrew by her side. Together they would create a new life, a life built on love, acceptance, and the knowledge that no matter what, they would never be alone again. As the stars continued to shine above them, Lyra and Andrew stood hand in hand, ready to embrace whatever the world had in store. Together they were unstoppable,